Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use the mic since there's so many people here. I think that'll be easier for you to hear me. So first, I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm really happy with how many of you showed up. It's awesome. And I want to thank C and the team and the board here at Blue Sky for sponsoring our exhibition and for all the help in coordinating and installing the show. So thank you all. So along the way, does anyone recognize where this photo was taken? The grotto where? No. No, but it's, I discovered this labyrinth a few years ago while I was hiking in Bandon Dunes. So it's a labyrinth that they have in the middle of the forest, just you can hike right into it. And I kind of thought that it was a perfect visual metaphor for my creative journey. It's kind of a visual metaphor, a circular journey of growth and discovery with lots of twists and turns. So I thought that was really appropriate. So I have a version of this presentation that delves more deeply into my past, my background, and various projects that led up to where I am right now. But I'm just going to give you the real abbreviated version because I'm really more excited about the work that's on the walls, and I really want to talk more about that today. So, as C mentioned, my journey began in Pittsburgh, PA, where I was born and raised. And I developed a passion for art and nature at a very young age. And here I am at 7 years old. And I had won a prize at the elementary school art fair. And so they asked me to demonstrate my process for creating the papier-mâché sculpture. So what I really love about this photo is, aside from the sparkly blue cat-eye glasses, is the how engrossed I am in the creative process. And it just never seemed to matter what the medium or the subject matter was with me. I took every art class that was offered through high school, and I even petitioned to get into the all-boys mechanical drawing course. I know I was supposed to be in home ec at the time, but... So my original plan out of high school was to get a degree in art education and teach at the high school level while I worked on my MFA. So that was until I got into the classroom for student teaching, and I realized immediately that was not for me. So big turn in the labyrinth at that point. So I ended up completing my BA in visual arts, as C had mentioned, at UCSD in San Diego. And there I studied filmmaking and video production in addition to training in traditional darkroom photography. So after that, I had a lot of opportunities to work in the motion picture and television industries, and later on in software development. But I continued photographing on the side the whole time. And along the way, I was exposed to many influences that have shaped my creative journey. So you see listed here lots of different artists, photographers, different art mediums, cultural activities, even science, physics, and metaphysics. And I also want to point out that I have listed the Girl Scouts here because my Girl Scout summer camps and nature walks are where I really discovered the wonder of nature. So, as you can imagine, as a photographer, I've always been most passionate about nature and landscape as my subject matter. And for many years, that meant seeing what is out there, looking for the perfect light or the perfect mood, or finding creative angles and compositions, or getting in close to show the abstract qualities in nature. Then about 10 years ago, I started taking some creativity workshops, and that led me to explore more of my inner landscape. So thinking more about what am I feeling, what am I thinking, what am I experiencing in the landscape, and how can I express that in my work. Also during that time, I was learning a lot more about climate change, and living in the central coast of Monterey, I was experiencing a lot of escalating weather events. So I had kind of a growing sense of climate anxiety that I wanted to find a way to express in my photography. So I found a workshop called Altered Landscapes, and we covered a lot of different techniques in that workshop. In-camera techniques, digital post-processing techniques, collage and montage techniques, gold leafing. And then we got to the lessons on crinkling and tearing and stitching prints. And that was really the aha moment for me, where the process and the concept that I was trying to express came together. And that's when my folding and mending project was born. So with this ongoing series, I'm hand folding and burning and stitching my physical prints as a way of conveying the impact of climate change on the environment. And the stitching is a metaphor for the repairing and restoration we need to do to make our world whole again. So there's two questions that I'm often asked when people see my work in person, and that is, how do you come up with ideas for these pieces, and how do you make them? What's your process? So those are the two things I want to share with you today. So, for example, this piece, Drying Out. My husband Don and I have often hiked in the Eastern Sierra for the past 35 years. And there's always been glaciers up in the highest peaks, up above 10,000 feet all year round. And these glaciers feed the lakes and streams that actually go into the California aqueduct and travel south and to our agricultural areas, all the way down, providing water to LA, which you may have heard about after the recent fires. So when we were up there in the fall of 2018, California had been in the middle of a severe drought for a number of years, and there were no glaciers on the mountaintops, and the lakes and streams were extremely dry. And it's all a result of global warming, obviously, and it's threatening both our food and water supplies. So in this collage, I interrupted the flow of the glacier-fed stream with an image of a dried creek bed to kind of show that. So that's kind of how my ideas and my process flow together. When I started on this project, I spent a lot of time experimenting with a number of different kinds of papers because I needed to find one that would hold my folds without cracking the ink. So I was really happy to discover an archival paper that's made from the agave plant. So no trees are harmed in the making of these pieces. Meantime, the drought continued, and it was impacting our forests in California in a major way. In 2022, the US Department of Agriculture study estimated that 36.3 million trees died in California that year. That was up from 9 million in 2021. So those trees were stressed from years of drought, and many of them succumbed to diseases and insect manifestations, and obviously became fuel for wildfires. So this piece, called Forest Deconstructing, it's one of my more complex in terms of the folding. So this top image here shows the back of the print. So you can see areas where I cut and made all the different folds. And then in the bottom, you can see the front of the print. So to make these folds, I very lightly dampen the back of the paper, and then I make the fold and I hold it till it sets, and then this paper, when it dries, it holds those folds in place. And one of the big takeaways I got from that workshop that I took was to do prototypes. So it can be kind of intimidating to go in and manipulate your fine art print after you make it. So I make prototypes just on office paper, off my office computer or printer. And sometimes I do 2 or 3 or 4 prototypes to figure out exactly where I want to put the folds, where I want to put the stitching. And then I make these archival prints and I kind of follow the final prototype. So I brought along some of my prototypes today. We're going to display them after the presentation. You're welcome to look at them. You can pick them up, hold them, ask me any questions about them. So we'll do that later. So this paper, the agave paper, it's really thick and fibrous, and which is great for the folds, but it's way too thick for me to pull the needle and thread through. So I have to poke holes to kind of make a path where I'm going to pull the stitches through. So again, that's something that I really need to work out in the prototype so I know where I want to put those holes for the stitching. So then came the wildfires. So the Santa Cruz CZU fire, the Carmel Valley fire, and the Big Sur fires were all started by the same dry lightning event that we had in 2020. They're all very close to home. Had a lot of friends impacted by those. So I knew I wanted to incorporate the burn scars into my work. So I went out and photographed them. And I thought it would be impactful to collage the burn scars together with lush living forests. And as I combined the images, I started to tear them to reveal the image that's underlying. And I also started scorching the edges of the print. So you'll see in a number of these how the edges are scorched, and I just do it with the flame from a fireplace lighter. Then I thought about having pieces completely torn off and sewn back on. So this one, you can see that's what I did with that piece that's hanging off on the bottom. It was completely torn off and then stitched back on. And this piece also, you can see the scorched edges really well, how that works on the left and the right. Down the road. So this piece is from our visit to Oregon a few years back. We were driving along Highway 138 between Bend over to Bandon on the coast. And as we were driving along, the road was really closely bordered on either side with this really dense green forest. It was actually dark on the road because the forest was so dense. And then we went around one bend and we were just confronted by this huge burn scar. I think it's from the 2020 fire season, if I'm not sure. But it was really breathtaking to round the bend and see those acres and acres of burned forest. So I collaged these two together, and they're just taken a few hours down the road from each other. And I also want to give a shout out to my husband, Don, who's here in the back, for his patience, because he is always open to stopping whenever I ask him so I can get out and photograph, and I appreciate that. So Rivers in the Sky is my response to the atmospheric river events that bombarded the Central Coast over the past few winters. I'm sure you're all familiar with that here in Oregon, too. So we had record rain, snow, damaging winds that brought flooding and landslides, fallen trees, power outages, road closures. The road south of Big Sur is still closed because the land has not stopped sliding yet. So I wanted to convey the impression of rivers overflowing their banks and water flowing in all directions. So I thought, well, I could, with the directions, do a vertical and a horizontal. So what I did here was I cut a slit in the horizontal print, and then I slid the vertical print through. And then I did the fold across to kind of mimic the currents of the river. And you probably know that rivers in the sky comes from the definition of what an atmospheric river is. They're like long, narrow bands of water vapor from the tropics, like rivers in the sky. This is a close-up of the stitching in that piece. I wanted it to kind of be holding the shrubs together as if to fortify the land against the deluge of the water. And I let long strands kind of twist and turn around to mimic the branches in the shrubs. And you can also see how I distressed the edge on the left there. Again, that's something I did by lightly dampening the back of the print and then kind of scrunching it to make it look like it had been pummeled by the currents, I guess. This is another atmospheric river piece. So atmospheric rivers are ranked on a scale of 5 based on their strength and duration of the storm. So category 1 is primarily beneficial, category 5 is hazardous, causing harm. So the images in this piece were captured in the green belt that's adjacent to my backyard during an AR level 4 event in the winter of 23-24. So the swirling gusts of wind were so strong and sustained that even healthy trees were snapped off and uprooted. So the top image here is kind of a slow capture image showing the force of the wind during the storm, and the bottom image is the aftermath in that green belt. And I also collected some pine needles that were blowing around and preserved them to incorporate in the piece. And then it's all mounted on a close-up of the trunk of a fallen tree. So interconnected. While I was working on this collage of 10 different prints, I came across this quote by Jane Goodall that I thought was really relevant to the piece I was working on. I'm just going to read it. When I was studying chimpanzees, I learned about the interconnectedness of all life in the rainforest, how every species of plant and animal has a role to play in the tapestry of life. When a species becomes extinct, a hole is made in that tapestry. When it becomes too torn and tattered, an entire ecosystem may collapse. So in a healthy forest, the biodiversity is what sustains the natural balance. But as our forests are warming from climate change, the trees are not getting enough water to photosynthesize like they normally do, so they're less efficient at absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So it's kind of what climate scientists call a feedback loop. So if the trees are not able to absorb as much carbon, then the global warming is increased, and then the forests get less water, and so it's kind of a vicious circle. Nexus of the Elders. This piece pays homage to the larger old-growth trees in a forest. It's a collage of 4 different portraits of trees from 2 different hikes in the coastal forests of Oregon. And I was reading a book called Finding the Mother Tree at the time by Dr. Suzanne Simard. You may have heard of that. It's a pretty popular book. And a quote from her, "The forest is more than a collection of trees. It is an integrated whole. Individual species organized into complex community structures that promote the fitness of the whole group." So these old-growth trees are like hubs in the ecosystem. They connect and sustain hundreds of other species of trees and plants and animals. They also share nutrients through underground fungal networks with other trees and other species. And these large old trees absorb as much as 3 times more carbon from the atmosphere than young trees. So even if you're logging and clear-cutting forests and replanting trees, those young trees are never going to absorb as much carbon as the large ones are, the old ones. And here's a detail from that piece. And here I used a feather stitch to tie the prints together. I like how it kind of creates a vine-like element that echoes the texture of that forest undergrowth. And the cost of soft, I don't know if everyone's had a chance to see the whole exhibition, but these sculptures are in the other room. So I wanted to focus a little bit more on the mending part of the folding and mending concept, how we can have a positive impact just by making informed decisions about the products that we buy and use in our everyday lives. So these photo sculptures are in response to what the Natural Resource Defense Council calls the issue with tissue. So basically, in a nutshell, the softest, most absorbent brands of these tissues are using a high percentage of wood pulp sourced from old growth forests, mostly in Canada. And I just mentioned the importance of those old growth trees to not only the ecosystem, but our climate stability. So we're essentially cutting them down to make these single-use disposable products. So there are alternative fibers available, like bamboo, and we also now have the ability to use recycled paper products. So there's a lot of options to this practice. So I wanted to draw attention to how manufacturers need to increase sustainability. So the Natural Resource Defense Council has been rating these tissue brands for the last 6 years, and they update their scorecard every year. So it's based on the percent of that old growth forest fiber that's used, the percent of recycled paper, the percent of alternative fibers, and also how much harmful bleach is used in the manufacturing. So you can see how your brands rate on their latest scorecard. I brought a handout, there's some in the other room with the sculptures that has a QR code. And you can use that QR code to look at the scorecard, see how your brands rate. Okay. So this is my cat Buddha. And I'm continually trying new tissue brands that are highly rated. There's a lot of new brands that come out, and a few manufacturers are updating their products too. So he was as anxious to try this new brand as I was. So, and then I have one kind of funny story that I'm going to close with. So a woman attended my artist talk that I gave when I had an exhibit down in San Diego. And a couple months later, she emailed me, and she was on a tour of the UK. I think she was in Ireland at the time. And she said, "I've been thinking about you on this whole trip because the toilet paper is really scratchy." And I thought that was very funny but touching because, you know, that's the kind of response that I'm hoping for with my work. So that's as far as we go today. So thank you again, and I'm going to hand it over to Charlotta, and then you don't want to take questions now or wait till the end? What? Okay. If you have any questions, and then I'll set up those prototypes over there for you to look at too.
Thanks all for coming. So I wanted to specifically talk about my work in this exhibit. I've been a photographer for a long time and done various works. But in this exhibit is my recent landscape work that I'm continuing working on, but I've been photographing the landscape in Iceland, where I'm from for 20 years. And I wanted to show you how it began. And so, to give you a better idea of where this work came from. And so the early work was about my emotional response to the places I visited. And it began after I moved to the States. When you're from Iceland, you can't wait to get away. It's so small, so isolated, but as soon as you go, you kind of miss it. We're very connected to the nature there. And at the opening, I was talking to some people about the elves and how they're diverting roads so not to disturb their homes and ruin their equipment. From the beginning, I've been fragmenting the landscape like you see here, and then putting it together. And so it was actually, I got the idea for this when I came home one Christmas. We were driving from the airport through the lava fields, and I'm like, wow, I'm home. Oh my God, I'm home. And so I was taking separate images and putting them together, but they still had the gaps and the missing parts related to memory and how you can never really experience anything to the fullest. And there you have the gap there. And I was also moving the images kind of to show how we are always on the go and never standing still. So I would move the camera and kind of to showing how the landscape is passing by and creating a sense of loss and intangibility as well. This is Þingvallavatn, which is the oldest parliament in Europe. And this kind of got me thinking about the landscape in a different way in 2007. I had been in the States for a while then, and I started thinking about not having the landscape kind of getting away from me, but I wanted to kind of create a place where I could stand in the landscape. So I started creating these vertical images. They are combined of 3 separate squares, and they are 20 by 60, so 20 by 23 up. And I wanted to create them this size, human scale, so I could kind of walk into the landscape. And the bottom piece is taken from the ground where I was standing, one in the middle, one in the horizon. And all of these are taken in the same place, but this is not the scene. I didn't stand still and just take it like this. So these are combined from multiple images that I took in this one location. And so I took the images. When I came back to the States, I started selecting images and creating these scenes. And so I merged the photographs, but I still wanted to have that break in the image. I wanted you to, at first glance, show how the landscape flows, but to keep that break, which is a reference to the older work, that you're never able to remember anything completely. And this is where the elves live. And so over the years, I started seeing more of the effects of climate change in Iceland. I'd been photographing by that time for 10, 15 years. And so I wanted to do work that would more directly address our effect on nature, rather than just the emotional effect the landscape was having on me. And so this is a glacier in Iceland that I photographed in 2014, as you can see, and then I came back in 2019. And so you can see the difference. The glacier had pretty much disappeared. And It was actually, I spent like an hour photographing in this place, and I was walking back to my car, and I hear this rumbling behind me, and I turn around, and the glacier is just calving, just coming down right there. And I don't have a picture of that, but I've created some work with that too. And it was a very emotional experience. And so 2018, I started kind of thinking about dispersing the landscape instead of combining it. And I wanted, instead of just cutting it up and gluing it, I wanted to make the pattern meaningful. And so I started using the fingerprint pattern. And so it shows our connection to nature as well as our impact on it. You can see this picture in the show. And I've done various, different things. There you have the fingerprint shape on the wall there too. And I've layered it on wood panel. And I also started working with the landform patterns, visualizing the erosion and loss, but also the tenacity of nature, with every layer revealing another part of nature. And so this large work here is the latest piece I've done in the topography study. And so I had a video here. I'll just tell you, it was amazing. I took the video of this place, and so I just scanned it, and so you can see it. Well, you can see here the ducks, and so you can hear there's nothing, no sound except the quacking and the duck, which was just fantastic. There was nobody there, no tourists there, and so it was quite an experience. And so, yeah, this is the video. And so I wanted to show you the process, how I work this. And so I start by selecting images from the location that create the scene, basically. And I photograph probably 100 photographs in each location. And so I create the scene, and then I start removing parts of the scene, of the landscape that I feel, they can be erased without compromising the overall scene. And from that, I create the pattern. Sorry, I'll grab some water. And so these are 4 layers that I use. And so these are the next layers. So I erase parts of it, and I try to kind of make it pop. I use, all of the different nature I found in this place. This is all next to this glacier, and I've never seen some of these flowers and plants even. Yeah, so this is kind of the process, and I print these 4 sheets, hand cut them. That was another video that's not playing. So I hand cut them. I put foam core in between to create the depth, or different materials to, like in this one, this has magnets to kind of get the depth to it. And so I'm also creating these vertical pieces, which they're inspired from the Scapes series. And so these are also human scale. And I was inspired to create an installation work from these pieces. And they're intended to create an interactive dialogue where the viewers can directly influence the work, and people are invited to take a piece with them. And so over the course of the exhibit, the artwork will erode and kind of mirroring the human's impact on nature. And so other biological patterns I use are palm prints. So this specifically is layered on top of text from an essay on climate change. And so I try to incorporate different things into the work and different ways of seeing. Also, I get really bored with doing the same thing again and again. And so I basically find a fingerprint pattern, and then I create the outlines, and it's really abstracted as well. And this is a text from the essay. I also use black fabric to show the absence and the disappearance, erosion of nature. And this is a retinal veins pattern. There's one image from this series in the show. And those works connect to memories as well, and kind of our inability or a denial to see what is going on. And this is a brain circuit pattern, which is essentially the same idea as with the retinal veins. And so 2021, I started cutting specific parts out of the landscape and layering it both on black fabric, which is representing the erosion and loss of nature. In this piece, I cut out the glacier and put it on black fabric. And I use velvet, black velvet, because it's the blackest thing you can get. I tried all kinds of black paint, black fabric, but in these, you really can't see that they are three-dimensional, which is what I wanted. Text as well. And also thinking about the topography layers, that are forming over time. I wanted to show that in different forms. And so these sculptural works are modeled of tunnel books, which are visual story books. Well, all books are storybooks, but they are kind of theater, time-based books. So this is these are attached with hinges, and another version is are these with the frames, and these collapse and expand. Both of them can be displayed, collapsed or expanded. And more recently, I wanted to create work that was a little more hopeful. And the pattern in the resurgent pieces is inspired by sidewalk cracks. I walk with my dog a lot, and he's always stopping. You know why? So I'm like looking around and seeing those tiny little flowers or piece of grass growing from there, and so I started using that pattern too, and so through the cracks in the photographs is the nature is right there, and here you can see the little flowers, and this is taken in the same location. That's also I love that with Iceland. It's so varied. The landscape is just so weird. This one as well, in the same location. And around the same time, I also started working with the branches. They were also inspired from my walk with my dog. We came home after the holidays, 2022, I think, and trees were all over in Palo Alto where I live. Branches strewn all over. You had to step over them. Biggest tree in the public park close by our house had been torn off by the roots, with the roots and everything. It was on the side, which was really heartbreaking. And so I started thinking about putting these together, I would cut photographs. These are 3 separate photographs, actually, the bottom 2, the bottom photograph, and then I wrap the photographs around these branches, and then I sew them together. And the idea is kind of to actively sew the landscape together, weaving together elements that kind of encapsulate the devastation, brought upon nature and the act of human intervention as well. And this is the newest work. And so that's it for me. Thank you so much for your interest in our work and for coming.
Yeah, well, let's open it up to questions for both artists. Raise your hand if you have questions for them.
How did you guys decide to work together to create this exhibition?
Well, that's an interesting story. Charlotta and I have entered a number of juried exhibitions, and she lives in San Francisco, I live in Monterey, so we're about 2 hours apart or so we don't work together. But being in some of the same shows, we met each other at openings, and we've had multiple people come up and suggest that you two should do a show together. And so after we got a number of those ideas, we put together a proposal and submitted it to some curators, and we submitted it to Blue Sky. And very happily, we were accepted here, and among some other places too. So we don't collaborate on pieces or anything like that. We've been working independently, so it's not that we were even aware of each other's work until we met at a show. So it's just been a parallel line that we brought together.
Question?
When you're
Landry.
making your creases, do you have to wet your paper to get them to stay so that they don't become sharp?
Yeah, so I very lightly dampen the back of the paper. If you dampen it too much, the paper starts to fall apart. You have to get it just right. Or if you don't dampen it enough, then the ink will crack. It'll make a sharp crease. So you just lightly dampen it and then fold it and hold it till it sets, and then when it dries, that particular paper holds.
So you have to do a lot of folding?
Just for a couple minutes, not a long time, yeah.
Do you use a paintbrush to dampen it or a squirt?
I use a squirt gun, and then I use a rag to kind of soften it.
Thank you.
When was the first time you said, I think I want to fold something and stitch it? And you must have, from going with flat work to something, now I want to add three-dimensional. What was the first time you said, you got inspiration from something else, or you just love to do?
It came from that workshop that I took, that altered landscapes workshop. I knew I wanted to alter my photographs in some way to express that climate anxiety I was feeling, but I didn't know exactly what. And I took that workshop. It was through Santa Fe Workshops. If any of you are photographers, they have really good workshops. They weren't exactly doing the folding like I'm doing, and they were doing stitching in a different way, but that's what gave me the idea. We had lessons on crinkling and different things like that, so that's kind of where that came from.
This question is for either of you. Where are you going next? Is it iterative or is it bold?
Sorry, is it?
Iterative or is it bold? Like, are you making like small steps in your next work, or is it going to be going in a bold direction and even down?
We were discussing that yesterday.
Yeah. For me, I was really lucky this past year to get a grant from the Center for Photographic Art, and they awarded 4 grants last year. I got the landscape grant, and we have the grant show coming up down there in Carmel in May. And I created a series on coastal wetlands on the importance of coastal wetlands and the impact that we are having on those wetlands and what the overall result of that is going to be with sea level rise. So that's a little series that I'm working on, just finishing up. I want to do some pieces on our grasslands and their importance and what's happening with them with climate change. And I'm also interested in consumerism and how overconsumption is impacting the environment and how it's causing climate change. So I'm kind of just in the research field. I'm reading books on that and kind of just have thoughts flying around about it. I don't really know my path for that. I'm gonna have to wait till I get to that turn, but yeah, that's where I am and where I'm going right now. Great.
Yeah, I usually just wake up and get a new idea. So I have no idea, what's that going to be and what it is. Mystery to me.
I have a follow-up question for you. What were you talking about? The fairies, like guardian fairies?
The elves?
Elves.
About the elves?
I don't.
So there's, so Icelandic people are really connected to nature and always have been. And we believe that elves live in mountains and big rocks. And so, yeah, so we believe that nature is alive, and we have had incidents, actually, with that road example that I took, is that people have been building a road, and there was an obstacle, they tore it down, and their equipment broke down, and I don't know if somebody got hurt or something, so there have been stories to kind of reiterate or I don't know if they're true, but my mom said she played with two of them. She had two friends, Ira or Ari, when she was younger.
That'll give me something to look up.
Yeah.
I guess I have a follow-up question to your over-consumerism idea or thoughts. Have you studied or looked at landscapes with over-consumerism within the landscape? Is that, in other words, not less nature hugely impacted by plastic, for example, or that kind of thing?
I really am just beginning research in that area, so I subscribe to a lot of newsletters from climate organizations. In fact, I have on my website a page of climate resources that lists different organizations that you can get information, keep yourself informed. It has links to different websites and videos, lots of information. It's a curated list that I personally either subscribe to those organizations or have read those books or have gone to those links. So they're all things that I personally recommend. But it's really in the initial stages. So I've seen some work that has plastic, like you're mentioning. There's an artist in Monterey who has actually taken plastic pieces out of the ocean there in Monterey Bay and incorporated them into his artwork. So I'm familiar with some artists that do that.
One more question. It seems like you both have really robust, actual studio practice, outside of just taking photographs out in the world. Can you speak to that a little bit, or what your history is in other modes of art making other than photography?
I've just been doing photography. I didn't think I would be an artist at all when I was younger. Photography was not 9 to 5, and I could travel, so that was a great idea. And so that's how I got into photography. This, I feel that this is expanding photography, creating these sculptural works, which I think is very interesting. And I used to do a lot of, work like this when I was younger. Crafts, I used to do a lot of crafts. So I spent a lot of time in the studio. I recently kind of got a studio. I was on my living room table for a long time, and I don't know if I would be doing the work with the branches if I hadn't moved to a studio. So that's really expanded the practice.
So for me, when I first started college, I was a general art education major. So I took all of the studio art, ceramics, printmaking, jewelry, tie-dye classes, everything. And for a long time, I was primarily a painter, watercolor and acrylic painter. But then once I found photography, I saw photography as a really separate art form from all these other things. I think, it was just capturing things and putting them, printing them. And it wasn't until I started down this path that I guess I've incorporated more, of the earlier work that I did with collage and other media into what I'm doing now. So one of those circular twists and turns that's come back. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
As a follow-up to that, Charlotta, having the studio influence the scale of the work? Could you have done some of these large pieces or vertical ones?
This would have been very difficult, but I was doing the larger vertical at my house on my table, so it worked. I had to move pieces around, but yeah, it's. I made it work, but I don't know if I would have gone this far.
How do you actually do the cutting?
Scissors.
Oh, scissors, not a knife?
No.
I thought she used a laser. She actually hand cuts.
That would be too slow. I just cut it up. So the X-Acto knife curls up the edges of the work, and it is hard to hold for a long time. And so you get a much cleaner cut when you cut with the scissors. You cut it down, and so it's easier to cut. Sometimes if I have really small holes or something, I'll have to start with X-Acto, but I pretty much move to the scissors when I can. Yeah, this is. I should have taken a video of me doing this piece. I mean, I'm just too short for this type of work, and my head is, coming out of some of those holes, and it's a process.
Okay.
Yeah, more questions?
Anything else?
How do you stay motivated? Like, do you ever get uninspired with the work that you're doing, and how do you start again?
Well, I am continually reading and looking for information, particularly about climate-related stuff. And I get a lot of motivation from that. And then I get motivated by people's response, too. I'm really excited that people resonate with my work as much as they do. When you're in your little studio by yourself, and you're making something that you haven't seen anyone else do, you have no idea how people are going to react to that. And it's really inspiring to me, people's response to it. That helps keep me motivated. There's times I get frustrated when I'm working on a piece and it's not coming together, and then I can't move on to something else because I'm absorbed with this piece that's not working. So you just have to stick with it, and sometimes you have to give it time. It may not come together right away. I have to sleep on it for a few days, or think about something else, or go for a walk, or look at someone else's work, or those kinds of things.
Yeah, I usually just, I think every year in January I panic. I'm never going to get a new idea. What am I going to do? I can't do this the same, way. And then all of a sudden something pops in my head, and, get inspired, by the dog walks, and try to be open to new things, experiment.
Experiment.
I get a little frustrated as well with experiments. I want things just to go, but the tunnel books, for example, were a complete nightmare. Yeah, I was surprised that I lasted this long, you know, doing one edition after another modification, and this wasn't working, and this wasn't working, but I persisted. So it's different things.
I have two questions, so just both out, in some ways not related. Both of your work deal with the impact of climate change, not the responsibility of climate change. The viewer is left to draw conclusions of responsibility or change based upon viewing the image that clearly shows impact. So I'm curious about that. Part of your assumption as an artist is that it is up to the viewer to determine and accept responsibility, or if you have responsibility to communicate that. The second is more technical. You could talk about the process of the sticks. It's an interesting, photography is often 2- or 3-dimensional. Round photography is intriguing in terms of your vision and how you do that, how you get that image.
Yeah, maybe I can answer that first before I forget it, before I forget the question. So these, I don't know, these just, it just came naturally to me. I just saw these branches and I wanted to do something with them, and I have to wrap paper around them and put them together. And so these were not a lot of, the experiments were how to get that paper to stick, to the damp branches. It just came to me.
The ability to see the line, for example, the line of a mountain in that kind of 3-dimensional pattern, it's not flat, but when the viewer looks at it, you see the line.
Yeah.
But the line is perfect. It's visually very interesting process.
Yeah, I tried to select images that have kind of a striking, landscape, the mountain ranges and everything. And so this actually has 3 images, but the 2 that are wrapped around the branches are one taken from the ground where I was standing, and then one of the scene. And I alternate them, glue them on, and sew them together like that.
So do you see it that way when you shoot it, or is that something that comes later?
No.
As you look at the frames?
Yeah, so I go to Iceland, I shoot like crazy. I've collected, I have a collection now throughout those years of images that I use. And so I usually get the idea of doing something, and then I start selecting photographs from that collection that I think might be interesting or work well with that presentation. And some are better than others. I've definitely done some and just, rip the paper off and cut up the thread and just started, if the images are not coming together. And the other question?
I can maybe talk about your other question. So I guess I see my role as an artist is to express my experience of life and express my feelings and what I'm going through in my life. And there's a term back in the 90s, I was living in San Diego, and the Chicano art movement was just taking off. And they considered themselves to be what they called artivists. So they were social, their work was specifically meant for social activism. So most of my work, I don't see myself as an activist in that direct way, except that I think I'm kind of moving a little bit in that direction with the consumerism that I'm interested in doing. And also my sculptures, I think that is that's probably the most activist pieces that I have, because they're directly related to a way that you can take action in your everyday life. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Yes.
So if I can chime in, I think it's completely hopeless for artists to control what the viewer is going to take from the work. It's impossible. One person is going to see this in the work and that in the work, and one person is going to dismiss it completely or not understand it. So I think it's really important to just do your vision and hope that people are going to get something from it, are going to resonate with it, are going to, see that, landscape is folding in on itself, or, it's disappearing, and maybe I should start considering, my impact on the environment, or, so I think, Debbie's definitely more of an activist than I am, but that's what you can hope. I don't think you can't control the viewer. I've always tried to be just true to myself, and then hope that the viewer is it's gonna resonate in some sense. I mean, if people, it reminds them of something that they, from their childhood or some nice place. I mean, that's the goal of art, I think. To, raise some.
The thumbprints and handprints are really powerful, super powerful.
The palm print? Or?
The
The thumbprints.
And the handprints, and I think the third one was the
retinal veins
and
brain circuits.
Super interesting,
And, I forgot to put in the slideshow that those patterns are in nature. They're everywhere in nature. They have rocks. So that waterfall over there, in that surrounding area, there are rocks with that circular thumbprint.
I think it is mankind's.
Well, and our connection. Maybe that's also our connection to nature. We're similar. We are like nature. And the retinal veins, they're like roots. So there are all kinds of patterns out there that connect us.
So it's interesting because you describe it as sort of a bug that I can't control, everybody getting the same message out of work. But it's actually not a bug, it's a feature. It's what makes art be powerful, is that every different person sees something different in it, and the same person sees something different in it on different days, and it has a richness. If something is very sort of propagandistic and says the same thing every single time, it doesn't have the power that art does. Yeah,
but that's why I think you can just be true to yourself. Do your work and hope that you raise some feelings with some people, because it's definitely out of your control. It's like one day you're happy with it and another day you're not, as one person is looking at art. So, but I think that's the power of art as well.
Okay, I think that's it.
Thanks.